Yep. Thank you for listening.
Please feel free to claim time or keep us posted on the mailing list.
All right. Can folks hear me?
We can hear you fine, Brad.
Okay. So I'm back talking about colorForth again. I seem to have gone on a bit of a jaunt, lured into the allure of spinning up an implementation of my own, and one thing that I've noodled over, and I appreciate Dennis's offline help in preparation for, is ways in which I could present things about colorForth in a way that is mindful of folks with different who see color differently. And I had gone, for those of you who catch Forth 2020 talks, I occasionally will give a talk over there, and I tried a color scheme without consulting Dennis, and actually a couple of different schemes, and intriguingly, they were dreadful, actually, as it turns out. And a lot of the guidance you'll find online is kind of makes some assumptions, and so I tried weird things like this, which sort of it's as hard for Dennis in some ways to see as it is for folks with ordinary color vision. This one was a theme that was came recommended by some website or other, and apparently is also not stellar. And so, as it turns out, after a little bit of back and forth, one of the more effective ones, hopefully, and obviously looking for feedback and iterate on it, is the simple tack of doing reverse video on a few of the colors. Makes them pop out more, because the nice thing about Chuck's color scheme is it's at the extremes, so you've got sort of everything fully saturated. So this is just conventional coloring, but with the definitions and variables, and then also the rarely used tags in reverse video. But in any event, so that's what I'll use. I keep thinking I'm going to pick a theme and use it going forward, but hopefully this one will stick, but we'll see. One other tweak I've made since I think I last presented here, and I think the last time I presented here, I may not have actually had my editor environment up and going. So, another challenge for colorForth is ideally you want to be able to tell the difference between a parsed number and a normal word. And so I've, at least for now, gone with using a subscript H and a subscript D for the numbers. It is a little bit busy. I'm torn about it, but in any event, that's what I'm doing for now.
You look real zoomed in, Brad. I can see part of a line, part of the lines. That's the other way.
Sorry, what you're saying? You can't see my screen, or
I see part of your screen, 32-bit addresses and value by, and then it stops.
let me try a different way of presenting. Let's see if this is better.
Anybody else having a problem?
Is this better?
It looked good for just a second, and then it zoomed out again. Now it's zoomed in. Now it's at the original.
How's this?
I can see, and then it went back to.
Uh-oh. Are others having this issue as well? Let me try. Let me reset more fully here. Let's see.
Others
I
are
could
saying
see you just fine.
Yeah, I'm seeing it good. You have to get rid of all of the other things that Zoom puts on.
Is that
Yeah, Zoom takes up a lot of space on the screen. It works for mine, but I'm at full screen and got rid of all of the participants, chats, and everything else.
any luck, Kevin? Or I'm trying to see if there's something on my end I can. Let's see. Oh, wow, you can do that. Let's not do that.
I'm not seeing a problem.
Just keep going. I'm the only one that is having the problem.
Okay. All right. So the implementation that I've got is a I still need a better name for it. I keep calling it CF for lack of a better name, but it is a 64-bit colorForth, but it is partially 64-bit and then partially 32-bit. It is 64-bit in the sense that the data and return stacks are 64-bit, but loads and stores by default use 32-bit addresses and values, and there are 64-bit operations you can do, but typically that's inconvenient because 32 is excellent for pixels and also for colorForth's encoding. I use a C harness to boot up and provide I/O, and one of the changes I've made, I think, since I last presented here is that I've made that interface even simpler. Previously, I had tried to call out of colorForth using something resembling the normal x64 convention to thunk back in to the outer harness. And I realized that that was sort of creating more work than I needed. And so instead I changed it so that the harness knows where just the data stack pointer is. And so you can just push things in the data stack. There's a single entry point that you just call into to get back out. I have that simplification got rid of some of the differences between, unfortunately, Windows and Linux have different x64 calling conventions, which is one more bit of complexity desperately trying to bleed over across the fence. But my goal overall is to try to have colorForth live in its own world and only thunk over for the absolute bog minimum. And the thing I'm kind of vaguely aiming towards is the ability to use the drivers available in UEFI boot to be able to sort of boot it without an OS, but we shall see. My goal in sort of this exercise is to try some of Chuck's unusual conventions, the sort of minus to invert and or as XOR, and particularly the conditionals are an interesting kind of mind-bending thing because there's this consciousness you need around at least this Pentium implementation of being aware of the state of the flags. I struggle with this still, and there's another slide about it. But in any event, it is what it is. I've actually grown fond of the immediate to green transition. I think if those of you who recall my last attempt at a colorForth many years ago, I ditched that convention with RainbowForth. Gosh, over a decade ago. But this time around, I found I kind of grow fond of it. Why colorForth? This will sound weird and abstract, but Forth has this nice property that you name some things very explicitly. There aren't a lot of languages where you would spell out the word variable, and yet on the opposite extreme, it's a language that avoids naming a lot of things. And I find that sort of honing in on that, sort of zooming in on that simplicity is nice, and colorForth helps with that. Color I find joyful, and I believe that colorForth is just simpler than a conventional Forth. And I got a question at Forth 2020 sort of asking about why is that, and I need to make a better slide for this. This is yet another attempt to sort of express that. It's sort of the core of colorForth is really just a dispatch table. It's just pull out a word out of memory, mask out the tag, dispatch based on the tag, and that's your interpreter. And that's that's an order of magnitude reduction in Forth's already low level of complexity. And to give sort of put that concretely, like in my my colorForth implementation, these two screens have the whole interpreter essentially, and there are some things that are built up before this to populate a dictionary, but the interpreter is just these two screens, and it's really just a little bit of plumbing to traverse the dictionary, an implementation of a word to dispatch for each of the color tags, put them all in a table, and then dispatch based on them. And I've even actually managed to stuff in the words for block and load and through on the same screen. So I think there's a notable difference in terms of the size of the interpreter, which I find fascinating and simplifying. I've continued to stick with sort of a variant of Chuck's register conventions. When I first started, I had almost completely sort of come up with the encodings for most of the basic instructions using the assumption I was going to use BX as the or rather BL as a stack pointer that would wrap around, kind of a la what Ting did with some of his later eForths, to avoid the problem of an overflowing stack. It's simpler to just have it wrap around. But as I got into things in bootstrapping, I discovered that, boy, it is awfully nice to use some of the string ops to bootstrap, and because they're smaller and simpler to encode. And so I keep meaning to sort of circle back and explore wraparound stack, especially as I've noticed that a majority of the cases where I manage to crash the system typically come from Stack Overflow, and so I need to do something to I either need to trap on it so I can recover gracefully, or I need to do wraparound stacks. Although in fairness, a lot of the cases where I'm overflowing the stack, I've also got out of control recursion. So I've used a different dictionary format than Chuck, where there's only 2 arrays, one for each, one for the macro dictionary and one for the Forth dictionary, and then I interleave the words and the addresses, and this just happens to work out nicely because I'm on it with 64-bit. I can load the pair of them in one go. I've now got an editor that's working. I don't think I had that last time I presented it at SVFig. It's inspired by a mix of VI and Chuck's editor. It is implemented in colorForth, so that was a sort of weird backwards bootstrapping that I did, where Chuck starts writing parts of the editor in assembly. I instead tried to bootstrap with this converter externally, and then wrote an editor, and maybe that's the wrong order, but it sort of lets me have the end system be more things in Forth. So it's got a bunch of features, color toggle. I borrowed Chuck's lovely idea about sort of using a clipboard as a stack. So I use a QWERTY keyboard as the base, and I reposition a few things so that I don't need to deal with modifiers on the keyboard, since I'm just taking raw key events that get passed over the divide from whatever the host OS is. So I stuff some keys in some peculiar places, question over where backtick would be, and most of them are in a conventional spot. And then the editor is modal, so when you're sort of navigating about, you use sort of home row to navigate, below the home row to move by pages. You can toggle shadow blocks. I'm still not sold on shadow blocks. I keep struggling with it, but I'm still giving that a go. You can toggle off visibility of blue words down here in the home row. And then I use the Windows Mac sort of convention for cut, copy, paste to do the single character sort of copy a thing into the clipboard or cut a thing into the clipboard. I've got buttons to toggle the color scheme, buttons to toggle the base, and then a key to input each of the different color words up on the upper row. My bootstrapping font is a pretty ugly font, but I'm well down the path where I probably should have just had a bitmap editor and done what Chuck did. But what I did to bootstrap, thinking it would be temporary, and here I'm still using it for the time being, is I've got a 4x6 font, where there's an extra bit to clone the leftmost row from the rightmost row. So some characters are 1 pixel wider, or rather, they're not actually 1 pixel. There, I have to scale them up because I'm using a 1024 by 768 display. This lets me pack in one character's bit pattern in a single constant that doesn't require more than the 28 or 27 bits that you can stuff in a normal in a single cell encoded colorForth encoded word. I've struggled with magenta variables a bit, partially because I find it a little bit annoying that they have quirks when it comes to a name that doesn't fit into a single colorForth cell. I've also struggled with the fact that since I'm writing the editor and the bootstrapper in colorForth, the notion of using a source position for storing the variable gets problematic, because now if you move the source around, you potentially broken the thing at runtime that you're trying to edit. Maybe I could address this by moving having a second copy of everything that I use for editing or something like that. But what I've ended up doing a lot of the time is doing a slightly different sort of pattern for variables, where I'll have a definition and then encode them. I have a separate data heap that is there just because I found that there were things that I wanted to allocate that were that I didn't want to statically allocate, and as I was struggling with magenta variables, I ended up doing that. I took another weird steer from that isn't in Chuck's Forth, that colorForth, that is interesting, but is based on some things he said in some talks. He at one point expressed the notion of, well, you know, with tellcall you don't really need loops, and I've actually found that actually holds up pretty well. In a bunch of places, I keep thinking, well, I'm going to go add for next or something like that, but I keep being able to get away with relying on tellcall optimization effectively being a jump, and then being able to do patterns like this, where I have a conditional and then I call the word calls itself down one branch, otherwise exits. Where it does get a little weird is with flag conditionals. These I struggle to deal with them. I'm really tempted to sort of cave and do something closer to what the GA144 does, where you're really just looking at the top of the stack instead of with Chuck's Pentium colorForth. You're looking at the state of the Pentium flags, and that often will match what's on top of the stack, but not always. So it gets hard to compose operations when you're trying to do things like, mask a thing or check for equality. And maybe I just need some higher level words. I noticed Chuck even, has an explicit word for less that is implemented in assembler that sets the state of the Pentium flags in a rather expensive instruction sequence. So I don't know, but in any event, I have a whole separate talk in mind to think about overflow flags and comparisons and sort of the design space there. There's some interesting things you run into. What I wanted to do this time was talk a little bit about graphics, and one of my goals is to draw pretty pictures. I want to swap out my ugly font for a scalable font to do lines, clipping, Bezier curves. And so I had basic box drawing where I can sort of fill in a buffer, and my one operation that I have with the host system is to bit-blit over the whole display. So that part was straightforward. Sort of one screen fold gives you basic block drawing. I have a graphics stack that is there to, my eventual goal is to support transformations, so that you could do a coordinate transformation, do some drawing and transform back. But I haven't really availed myself of this, other than to deal with I want to be able to have the editor, it lets me have a place to keep the state of the graphics variables separate for when you're in the editor versus out of the editor. One thing I found was that working with a bunch of XY values in the stack, it's nice to have some of the two and even 4 words, which was reasonably straightforward. An approach for drawing Bezier curves that I've used before, I did this with micro eForth, is this idea of a span table. So what I do is you keep a per scan line list of all of the places that you have a transition, and this sort of matches up with some of the there are algorithms for doing scan line traversal of polygons, and you could kind of do this indirectly with a buffer where for each row you can keep track of some number. I think I reserve like 20 positions. So you can have 20 horizontal positions at which you toggle whether the pen is on or off. And then you can just sort of zip through that table and draw all the regions that are relevant when you need it. It lets you draw lines and curves by recursive subdivision, which is nice, especially for Bezier curves. And you can sort of implicitly do clipping just by marking off the sides of the viewport. So to make that a little more concrete, if you have a buffer and then you've got these marks sitting in the buffer, and in memory what this would actually be is just a small list of sorted values per row. But then what you can do is fill them in from begin marks to end marks, and then you can have these complex regions that you get out of it. And so if you wanted to mark off an area, you simply need to mark the outline of it in the buffer, and then you'll get the right sort of polygon filling behavior. I'll show that off in the live demo in a moment. And then on top of that, you can do curve drawing. So you can, this is the span buffer code. So it's like one block of code. So it's not too bad to manage those buffers. And then Bezier curves are cool and are nice, especially if you like me, you eventually want to aim for a scalable font. So you can you have with a Bezier curve, you have the endpoints in the curve, and then you have some number of control points that form a bounding box for the polygon. And then what's really nice about Bezier curves is that if you do affine transformations of them, sort of rotations and other things, if you rotate the endpoints, or the control points, you'll actually get the equivalent transformation of the curve. So you can sort of treat the control points as equivalent to the curve. And then you can do parametric subdivision, where you sort of recursively go down the Bezier curve, and then you can sort of work on it incrementally, and it works out nicely because this ends up using just plus and divide by 2, so it's actually pretty elegant. And so the way the subdivision works is, imagine if you've got these blue points here that are in the far corners that are the control point and then the 2 endpoints. If you find the midpoint of each of them and then the midpoint of those 2 points, this green point here, now you have a new point on the curve, and then this you have 2 separate sub-quartic. This is a quartic Bezier curve, so sort of a order 2 one. So then these 3 points and these 3 points are now 2 new sub-Bezier curves. So you've learned 1 point on the curve, and now you can kind of recursively go down and finish out. And you stop at some point when you've sort of got enough subdivision. And so this code does that here first for lines. And I do one other thing, which is because I want to make sure I get sort of reasonable rounding, I for the X coordinate, but not for the Y coordinate, I shift everything over by 20 bits to do sort of a fixed point value. And I've got the 64 bits. I've got plenty of bits to do as much precision as I want. So 64 bits is a lot of bits. And then I need some operations to do some distance comparisons, and then the Bezier curve ends up being just this small little screenful. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but basically the idea is that you're checking to see, okay, am I close enough to the 2 endpoints close enough to each other? If they are, then I just give up and draw a line. Otherwise, I go and I find the midpoints, and then the midpoint of the midpoints, and then draw 2 more Bezier curves recursively. And then I have a wrapper call that sort of sets it up and deals with the fixed point. I've got a curve editor, which I'll show off in a second, and then what it does is it actually stores points in a packed source code format so that I can have them like live in source code and use them later and draw things with the keyboard and mouse. A bunch of things I want to do later, more graphics. I want to get my curve editor to actually create fonts that I can use instead of the junky font that's still there, and support transforms. I want to figure out my stability issues so that it's. I've actually found it's very nice to be in the environment and kind of in the flow, but the worst thing is when it crashes. So that kind of brings you out of things. And then I'm still struggling with some of the pain points. Chuck's conditionals are just tricky, and there's a whole as I say, sort of a sub discussion about that. And then I've struggled because I find that 256 words per page is kind of tight. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's making it sort of structured in a good way. But I feel like it's so tight it makes me do sort of pathological things. And I keep being tempted by adding conventional loops, but keep not doing it. And UEFI is on the list. I don't really have anything deep in mind for why I would want to do UEFI. It's kind of cool to be able to boot it up on, sort of quasi bare metal. UEFI is pretty far removed at this point from bare metal, but and then maybe I should get back to the other things I've talked with folks about doing, my FPGA synthesizer and so on. But let me go quickly do a demo, and I'm going to close this screen, and I will share the other. So here's the thing, and whoops, that went up on the wrong window. So I'll bring it over here. All right, so here's, I think I haven't shown this off in this group, but it starts up in the editor, and I kept some really low pixel version of Chuck's Pac-Man. There's toggling a blue box, there's shadow blocks where I've got my to-do list, and then there's gobs and gobs of screens full of colorForth, as one does. Let's see, what are some fun things I can show off? So I've got a dumper that can dump the current things. If we look at the same block, but sort of the raw dump, I've got a view that I can move around and look at the raw bytes, and you can see these are the encoded. This is that same first block where you've got the different encodings. You can see them in hex or decimal. I think I've got a toggle. I can't remember which key it is. It might be, no, not that one. I've forgotten which key I stuffed it on, but I've got oh well. Anyways, let's see. Like Chuck's Forth, the stack sort of, there's a mode where you can input values directly. I kind of show, I don't have as good of a visualization of what key does what, which I think is a good thing that Chuck did that I should probably at some point work on adding, but this is the problem of the bootstrapping the editor. And so I've got, actually let me make that properly full screen, there we go. So you can, do basic math if I want to put in, oops, let's not do that. And let's say I did 22 and 7, and then I can do /div and get something that's an approximation of pi, that type of thing. I can go back into my editor. The bootstrapping portion of the world, I think as I showed off before, like there's this one entry point, and then you give yourself the ability to compile words and then go to town. Let's jump ahead though to some of the graphic stuff. So I've got this is sort of what I showed off before, the Bezier curve drawing stuff, and I've got a couple of screens full of stuff that do that. Let me go ahead and load that block, and then sort of the basic buffer. Here's line drawing, and you can kind of it will do the right thing in terms of the scan buffer, where it's it's recursively drawing the points of the line into that scan buffer, and then at the very end it stripes through and fills it in. And then similar thing with the Bezier curves, and so now then you can get nice Bezier curves. So I'm got some line of sight on being able to do fun things there. I think. Oops. Uh-oh. That crash? Oh no. And then that's where my slide came from. So let's see. So let's go back into the editor. I've got this graphical editor here. So this word foo is got a packed encoding of a bunch of line and Bezier commands. And what I'll do is I'll park my cursor here and then run my glyph editor. And in this editor, I can go traverse through a set of points. And if I don't like where one of them is, I can move my mouse and I can move it around and adjust it. And I can also, let's see, if I say I don't like these 2 points, I can delete them and do that. I can also go if I go all the way over to the right, I could insert new points. Let me put a point there, and then maybe I'll draw a control point there, and I'll connect it to, why is it acting slow? It must be something with Zoom. Come on. It's acting goofy. Demo fail. Yay. All right, I'm going to exit and see. In any event, once you've done that, it's actually stored in the source code. So if I load this block, I can now run this word and get the same drawing back out. And so that eventually that will turn into enough of an editor to edit a font, and then all of that. Let's see, what else can I show? I have a rainbow here that I was tinkering with at the start of the session, where if I load this block and I do rainbow, I get a pretty rainbow. So in any event, that's that. I don't think I've shown this group as well. There's some, if I show the blue words are kind of cool, and there's definitely some things I want to do with blue words. I've got some words that mess with the state of the fonts as you're going. Oh yeah, that's another feature I've got here. If I do the right key sequence, I can go search for the definition of words. So I can jump over here. This is the definition of these. This little, I added a little glyph meant to be used as a blue word that can show the colorForth logo using a bunch of box drawing commands. And yeah, cool. Are there questions?
Brad, what I'm missing here compared to colorForth is the little menu down on the bottom right.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it was one of these things where, so my, let me go find the word here. Actually, I can search for the word. Oh, there, actually, there's panel, and then I can. So I've got this word panel that's a little bit like Chuck's menu, but the thing that Chuck's menus have that are nice is they've got a little series of values at the end of them that creates that nice menu in the corner. And I very much miss that, and have been meaning to put that in, because I do feel like it is great for sort of the visual recognition of it. And I think that the sort of the subtle hints of, I'm using particular characters here to tell you whether you're entering a number or a word, but that's not nearly as effective as showing the entire meaning of each key. So yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Right. Yeah,
It's
but
on my list.
Otherwise, and you're using the font that we came up with, and I'm able to read this.
Oh, good.
This is, you did a very good job.
I'm glad to hear it. I think it's funny, after having tried, the italics and things like that, to realize that, reverse video is actually a really nice cue. And I think one of the things I have always wondered whenever folks will try to present colorForth with alternate, you can put other characters in there, but kind of some of the joy of it is that it is subtle and in line and so on. So in any event.
So Brad, you want to
years ago, even with pure APL, I made a font, a bitmap font like that. And then when I made the first Cozy, which was also by the 80s, in the pure APL, I made a font that was, again, still stuck with bitmap back then. But I made the minuscules were just shorter versions of the majuscules because I sort of had if you're from somewhere on the other side of the world, you got enough problems with multiple character sets as it is. So it got it down to okay, the small characters are just small versions of the big characters, and everything is a sort of big block characters. But that was very much. I mean, you go to something like Japan, and it's got like 4 different fonts. So nah, give me one font. But it is interesting that there is a use for big versus small characters.
Mhm.
Brad, do you want to de-share it now?
Sorry, what?
De-share. Take your sharing off.
Yes.
All right. Any other quick questions for Brad before we get to Bob? All right. I've been trying to message Don. He's been saying he's got network problems. I'm not sure he's going to present.
Yeah,
So-
we got to remember that it is Olympics time, and everybody's on the internet trying to see Olympics.
Nobody's watching the Olympics.
Yeah, right. Believe that as much as you want.
We're
believe
not
it.
watching the Olympics. we're in a
We're
fourth
not
meeting.
at the moment, but I will be eventually.
Okay. I didn't think that many people were interested this year, but I need to see numbers. It's one of these questions that you could answer by actually looking at facts, or you could just have feelings about it. Okay.
I just have a suspicion at this point.
I have a message from Don saying he's going to push till next month. So I did want
He
to
said in the chat he was having trouble with his internet, apparently.
yeah, I got a personal DM from him saying he's going to push to next month in response to an inquiry. So I wanted to ask. Nobody's expressed a lot of interest in this elevator pitch, and I really liked Brad's last month, and I've heard at least one other person express that same opinion. So, Brad, would it be possible to install that as the intro, or this is our page on the YouTube video channel?
I can certainly, yeah. I think there's some kind of a first an intro video or something. I'm happy to just try to find an option to put it in there.
If you look
Folks
at
approve of it.
look at Forgotten Weapons, and it has an intro that when you go to the channel, you get this video, and I think that would be a really good thing to